Well, it's a Sony lens release day, so chances are your feed is being bombarded by videos right now. Today, Sony released not one, but two lenses. We've got an extreme telephoto, the 400 to 800mm, and we've also got the FE 16mm f1.8G lens. If you've seen my other video on the telephoto, you know that I really wasn't wild about that lens. However, the 16mm G lens, I like a lot. So this lens is very compact and very lightweight and very portable. It weighs in at just 300 grams, and you might be noting that size-wise, this is very similar to the 20mm G lens that we've had for a few years now, which is another lens that I like a lot. One thing that's really cool is this lens is very wide, but it still accepts filter threading. You can use standard 67mm filters, and they will not interfere with the front element. This is a G lens, so the lens hood does not have a button release. It simply clicks in and out of place, but it works just fine. The one thing that I really like on this G lens is, much like the 20mm, we do have an aperture ring on here. So if you want to select your aperture from the lens, you may do so, or you can put this in automatic and just do it from the front dial, depending on which mode you're in. Despite the compact size and light weight, Sony did put a lot of elements in here. There are 15 elements in 12 groups. You've got 2 advanced aspherical elements, 3 extra low dispersion, and 1 super extra low dispersion. Another nice thing about this lens is the price. Now, when we look at performance, you wouldn't expect this lens to come in under $1,000, but it indeed does. So I want to show you some sample images here of how this lens performs. So for the test shots that I did here, I went down to this place called The Warehouse in Dallas, which is a contemporary art gallery that has a very significant collection to it. And I love this space because it's very well lit. So if you're using a wide angle, you're going to get fairly even lighting. There's a lot of artwork in here, a lot of hard 90-degree angles, so we could see how the distortion works on this lens. And it performed quite well. I will say, from just an experience standpoint, one of the things that I love about this lens, it is lightweight and it is very small. It's real easy to carry around. I have this on an A7R4, so I'm getting high resolution out of here in a very compact package. This is one of the things that Sony has always been good at, and it's a really nice experience using this lens. I love the aperture ring on here. It just makes it really easy to use a prime lens with one focal length and go out, you know you're going to shoot wide angle images, and it just works. Now, one thing I want to show you about this lens, this is an interesting piece. This is by a Czech artist by the name of Wojtek Kowarek. This is kind of a mural style piece. It is very long and very trippy. It's got kind of this Roman theme to it, but it sort of has this works progress vibe to it from mid-century America. Anyway, it's a great piece. It is huge, and I'm standing, I don't know, maybe 10 feet from the painting, and I was able to get the whole thing in. So having a 16mm lens comes in very handy. Now, one thing I wanted to test on this lens was sharpness. You can see there's a little bit of vignetting in this image here, but if I zoom in to the, well, zoom in the center first, you can see there's a lot of textures. This painting is actually acrylic and also uses sand, so it's got some interesting three-dimensional texture to it that is really subtle but noticeable. I also noticed this guy down here. You can see the sand texture in his pants down here, which is near the edge. So you can see this lens is very sharp. The color rendition is very good. This is what it looked like. It was very well lit, and the image looks great. So one thing I want to note on here is that when I was shooting, I set my camera up to capture both RAW and JPEG images. I was doing 2 formats. The reason I did that, a lot of Sony lenses that have come in for review over the last 2 years rely heavily on post-production for correction. I'm reviewing these before these lenses are released, therefore Lightroom doesn't support them. There are no lens profiles, so that's why I need to shoot JPEG, so I know kind of what it's going to look like in the end. I typically try to avoid doing that because when you shoot JPEG images, not only do they do lens corrections in camera, but they also sharpen and do other things too, and I don't want any processing. If I'm reviewing a lens, I subjectively want to see what the lens looks like just by itself, but that's really hard to do with a lot of these lenses, so as a safety, I did that. This image that we're looking at right here is the JPEG image. I'm going to show you the RAW image now, and you're going to see that, whoa, there is a ton of barrel distortion on here. And that's just how it is these days, and this is something that I've kind of come to accept more recently, and like I said, Sony's done this for a while. Other camera companies have done it for years. Fujifilm, you ever try to go change a lens profile in there? You're not allowed to. They're baked into the RAW file. Nikon has done it. Sony's obviously done it. It's not uncommon to do. The problem that I have with it is that I used to be of the mindset that if we're going to be squeezing and stretching the image, that can actually affect sharpness, and I have not gotten a real definitive answer from somebody who's actually an optics designer, so if somebody's watching this that knows, please leave a comment below because I would love to know more. But the way that it was explained to me is that it requires lens elements, certain lens elements, to end up bending the image so you'd correct for distortion, especially with a wide angle. You're pulling a lot of wide angle light rays in, and you've got to feed those into something that looks correct in the end. And it takes lens elements to do that. One thing you can do to cut down on the lens weight and the design is actually to let that happen in post. And I've actually heard that it does not have much impact on the sharpness or micro contrast within an image. I have never actually seen it. I just know that it is a potential to take away from sharpness. But anyway, that's the way it was explained to me. Sony does this a lot. The downside to doing this is that it really is going to depend on lenses that are paired with specific cameras. Obviously, Sony doesn't, that's not an issue because they're Sony lenses and Sony bodies. But the other thing is you have to make sure that any RAW converter is actually going to support that lens profile. Otherwise, you're kind of out in the cold. And that's one thing that's happened with a lot of the Sony lenses that have come in, especially on the cheaper end. And I think that this is a great way to save money for a lot of camera companies. But anyway, you can see that the JPEG obviously corrects that in camera and it looks just fine. And I'm not having sharpness issues on here. Now, would you ever see this on a G Master lens? There is a little bit of correction on something like the 12 to 24, but not very much. I think another impact of not having to put as much glass in the lens is it does affect the price. The G Master is 3 times as expensive as this lens is going to be. So that is one thing. And I think what's really cool about this actually is that Sony are making a concentrated effort to provide products for people at all price points. And so to have every wide angle lens be super expensive would not make much sense in terms of being able to include an audience and ultimately make money, which is what any camera company is trying to do. So I do like the fact that they are being a little more democratic with their choices of what kinds of lenses are available. The other thing that I like about this is it is so light and so portable. I mean, it is a tiny lens. It's almost like when you get into Leica M territory, it's a little bit bigger, but I like that feel. I like being able to just, the portability of it, and I would actually also argue that that's going to impact the types of photos that you're going to do as a photographer. That's why I've never been a big fan of big, heavy gear. When you take it out, everybody's camera aware. As soon as you pull it out, it's big, it's massive. Something like this is much more stealth, much more easy to use, and I really think that the quality on this, at least from what I can tell with the JPEGs, looks really good. Now, is this a lens that I would buy? Well, I already own the 20mm G lens, and I actually have the 12 to 24 also, so I'm kind of covered in that department. There's a big difference between 16 and 20 millimeters, I do want to note, but I would probably rent this lens and use it if I had a specific need for it. I'm not really a big wide angle guy all the time, so I'm not going to buy lenses that are just going to sit around necessarily. So anyway, that's my personal preference on this, but I would love to know what you guys think. I think this lens has a lot of potential. I think it looks great, and I think just the ergonomics of it are probably its strength. I would love to know what you guys think. Drop me a comment. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.